Hi, my name is Amanda Rose, and this is my first diagnosis assignment for managerial economics. In this first assignment, we were asked to explain how we make hard decisions at work. So I will say, usually when I'm at work and I am a teacher, I tend to think of things in the Eisenhower matrix. So urgent, non-urgent, important, not important. And over time, I've seen myself develop from living in the urgent and important or the not important but urgent interruptions to training myself to focus on the not urgent but important category. So I've worked at planning and seeing the scope and sequence of my job. So applying the principles that we've been discussing in class, as well as the article I chose for the assignment this week, I'm going to share a scenario that was basically a decision that did not go the way I thought it would go. Um, so I was, to give you some context, it was my first year at a school, and this was my first year ever teaching lit. I am primarily a history teacher. Um, this lit program was based entirely off the novels and not a set curriculum. And this was with 11th graders. And I'm not even going to mention the title of the book that was in controversy, but I will give you the scenario. It was turned out up until this point, I had been reading the books with the kids and we hadn't had any issues, but I had a heavy class load, so that meant oftentimes I was reading the homework with the kids. So when they were doing something the night before, so was I. So no one gave me fair warning or a heads up, and there was no resources on this book. I was just told that this is part of the curriculum and we teach it. And so I'm reading the first couple chapters in this book, and it was a pretty short book, but there was a prolific amount of hard, foul language, and there was plenty of objectionable elements. And so I ended up reading the whole book that night just to know what I was dealing with. And when my 11th grade girls, it was an all girls class, came and, or all girls that day, came that day, they were wide-eyed and horrified by what they had read. And so we ended up having a very powerful discussion actually about how words have power and what are we letting our mind dwell on. So we talked about like Ephesians 4:29, and things like Matthew 12:36. We are accountable for our words. And we really stuck on Philippians 4:8 through 9. What is our mind dwelling on? We also discussed how sometimes sometimes authors are trying to do something doesn't mean we necessarily agree with it, but what was this author trying to convey by this word choice? So we had a great, frank discussion, but I could tell that they were already not comfortable with the book. Personally, my personal convictions, I was not comfortable with the book, and I knew what was coming next. And so I felt like I was taking into consideration my students and where they were at, my convictions, and what I believe I can teach properly and well. And granted, this was my first year teaching lit. And so I changed how we were going to do that unit about that book. And at that point, I told the students, you are no longer accountable in class for reading the rest of the book. I will go over the plot and the plot of the story so you know what happens. Um, but we're going to focus on the author and the themes and what we need to extract from the book, but we're going to leave it at that. And so they were content with that. I felt like I was doing a good job by their parents and by the school and showing kids what a biblical worldview looks like. Um, and just by sampling that book, even. But my principal at the time heard via a parent email that I just had not assigned the rest of the book. So, in an email back, I explained my whole scenario, as I just kind of explained right now, and asked to meet him about the situation. And instead, I got an email back telling me that I was not allowed to make a curriculum decision and that what I had done was very inappropriate and like should not have been handled that way. And I was upset by that because I felt like I had um, been prudent. I felt like I had embodied Proverbs 14:15, being prudent to see the reality as it actually truly was, and I acted accordingly. So this was a decision that did not go the way I thought it would. Um, Potentially, I didn't follow the rational actor model, maybe because there was a loss. Maybe I had a loss aversion to the risk of teaching it the whole book as it was. Maybe my principal had a loss aversion um, by not allowing his teacher to do what she needed to do in the classroom based off her context. So I'll let you guys discuss that. That's really, I'm interested to know because I'm not sure if it's both or one of us in particular. But if we were using Frobe's questions with my scenario, who's making the decision? That was me in the classroom. To my point, I didn't feel like I was changing the curriculum. I just felt like I was changing the way I taught the curriculum. The book was still the same. Um, Two, do they have information to make a good decision or to make it a well thought out decision? I thought I had the information I knew. I believe my principal would have asked that question or answered that question differently. Um, he thought he thought I had been given the most adequate information, but apparently that was where I feel like a disconnect was. Because my big goal was emphasis of biblical worldview when we're dealing with objectionable elements. And three, do they have the incentive to make a good decision? My incentive for making the decision I made was because I wanted to do right by my students and their families. I'm considering if I'm a family, a parent sending a student to school, I'm limiting their exposure to the world or exposure with a biblical worldview lens, which is what I was trying to emphasize. Um, and I didn't, and I was thinking this is limiting how many emails I'm going to get from parents as far as like exposure, because the book was only going to get worse. It was going to get into sexual issues, and I could already tell my students were at a limit. I don't know how my principal would have answered that question. Do they have the incentive to make a good decision? And maybe that's an area that you'd like to respond to that I'm kind of curious about. So, but that's kind of the decision that did not go the way I thought it would. The article that I'm reading for our assignment this week is all about rules versus principles, building an equilibrium in relational contracts. And I think this applies to the situation I'm discussing because while I felt like I was acting in principles that the school as a whole aligned on, I was told by my admin that that was not the case. And it felt much more rule oriented and simplistic with the response I got about we just need to read the books versus to me, biblical worldview is of paramount. And we can still learn from books without reading the entire book at times. So I understand that other teachers could have gone about this book a different way. And to be honest, I might have too if I was in my 10th year of lit versus my first year of lit. But at the time, with that particular group of students, I was trying to be prudent and to see the reality as it truly was and act accordingly. However, that was not read the same way by my admin. So that was a decision that did not go the way I thought it would, but I really appreciate you guys listening to this, and I look forward to hearing your responses. Thank you for your time.